My beloved child. Do not let your hand move away from this moment just yet. Let the noise around you soften. Let the restless thoughts inside you become still, because something hidden beneath the surface of your story is beginning to rise, and your heart deserves to hear it before doubt tries to silence it again. You did not arrive at these words by accident within this fictional story. You came carrying questions you have tried to bury. You came with memories you pretend no longer hurt. You came with a quiet ache that appears when the room becomes dark, when conversations end, when the world is asleep, and you are left alone with the truth you rarely speak aloud. You have wondered whether they ever understood what they lost. You have wondered whether your absence ever became real to them. You have wondered if the person you once loved continued living as though your heart had never touched theirs. And perhaps the most painful question of all has been this: did losing me ever become their regret? Come closer. There is more unfolding in this fictional heavenly tale than your eyes can see. Imagine, for a moment, a silent evening. The sky is dark blue, almost black, and a thin veil of rain rests against a distant window. A single lamp burns in a quiet room. Somewhere in that room sits the person whose name your heart once carried with tenderness. They are surrounded by familiar things, yet nothing feels familiar anymore. Their phone rests face down beside them. The room is quiet, but their mind is not. A song begins playing from another apartment, muffled through the wall. It is not even a song they deliberately chose, yet within its first few notes, a memory of you appears so clearly that they stop breathing for a second. Not because they expected it. Not because they invited it. But because regret has a way of entering through doors pride believed were permanently closed. In this story, that is where the unseen movement begins. Your soulmate's greatest regret is not simply that you walked away. It is not merely that conversations stopped, messages faded, or plans disappeared. Their regret reaches deeper than distance. It lives in the realization that they once stood before a rare kind of love and treated it as though it would always wait. They believed your patience was endless. They mistook your forgiveness for weakness. They assumed your loyalty meant you would remain no matter how carelessly they handled your heart. But there came a moment when you became quiet. Not angry. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Simply quiet. And that silence began teaching them what your words never could. For so long, you tried to explain how you felt. You softened your truth so they would not feel attacked. You swallowed tears before speaking. You rearranged sentences in your mind, searching for the gentlest way to say, "I am hurting." You asked for honesty. You asked for consistency. You asked to be chosen without having to compete with confusion. You were not demanding perfection. You were asking for presence. Yet every time you opened your heart, they gave you just enough hope to stay, but not enough certainty to feel safe. You became exhausted from translating your pain into a language they refused to understand. Then something changed. A strength began growing in the place where disappointment had lived. You stopped chasing answers that should have been freely given. You stopped begging for clarity from someone who benefited from keeping you uncertain. You stopped proving your worth to a heart that had become comfortable receiving your love without protecting it. They noticed the change, but they did not understand it at first. They thought you were merely upset. They thought you would return to the familiar pattern. They thought another apology, another promise, another brief moment of affection would be enough to restore what had been breaking for far too long. But this time, something inside you had awakened. You were no longer trying to convince them to love you correctly. You were learning to love yourself enough to leave what kept wounding you. That was the moment their loss truly began, although they did not recognize it then. The deepest endings do not always happen when someone walks out the door. Sometimes they happen quietly, inside the heart, when hope finally becomes too tired to continue carrying what two people were meant to hold together. You remember that moment, do you not? Maybe it happened late at night after another conversation left you feeling smaller than before. Perhaps you sat on the edge of your bed, staring at the floor while tears gathered silently in your eyes. Maybe you looked at your phone, waiting for words that never came. Or perhaps the words did come, but they were empty, delayed, careless, and painfully familiar. Something inside you whispered, "I cannot keep disappearing in order to keep this person." That whisper was not the end of your love. It was the beginning of your return to yourself. And now, within this fictional spiritual vision, heaven draws back the curtain to show you what happened after you stopped looking. At first, they felt relief. That truth may sting, but stay with me, because it is not the final revelation. They felt relief because they no longer had to answer difficult questions. They no longer had to confront the consequences of their behavior. They no longer had to look into the eyes of someone who could see through every excuse they offered. For a little while, freedom felt easy. They filled the silence with distractions. They stayed busy. They surrounded themselves with noise, new conversations, shallow laughter, and temporary attention. They told themselves that the relationship had become too intense. They convinced themselves that you expected too much. But the human heart cannot outrun truth forever. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, the relief began to change. The messages they once found overwhelming were no longer arriving. The person who checked on them when the world forgot was no longer asking whether they had eaten. The voice that calmed them after difficult days was no longer available. The warmth they had taken for granted disappeared from ordinary moments. At first, they noticed your absence in small places. A joke they wanted to send you. A place you once visited together. A familiar scent passing them in a crowded hallway. A phrase spoken by a stranger that sounded exactly like something you used to say. Each moment was brief, but each one opened a door. And behind every door stood another memory. They remembered the way you listened, not merely waiting for your turn to speak, but genuinely trying to understand what they could not explain. They remembered how you could sense their sadness before they admitted it. They remembered the nights you remained awake, offering comfort while fighting your own battles in silence. They remembered how you celebrated the smallest victories as though they were miracles. They remembered your faith in them. That memory became unbearable. Because when someone believes in you more deeply than you believe in yourself, losing them does not feel like losing one relationship. It feels like losing a mirror that once reflected the person you could have become. Your soulmate began to see that you had not loved only their surface. You had loved their hidden places. You saw the frightened parts beneath the confidence. You saw the old wounds beneath the distance. You saw the tenderness beneath the pride. And instead of using those vulnerabilities against them, you held them with care. That kind of love is rare. They know that now. But knowing came after losing. One night, they opened an old conversation. It happened without planning. Their finger moved through archived messages, past names that meant nothing, past conversations that had faded into digital dust, until your name appeared. They hesitated. For several seconds, they simply stared. Then they opened it. The first message they saw was ordinary. It was not a dramatic confession. It was not a final goodbye. It was something simple, perhaps a reminder to rest, a question about their day, or a small joke you sent because you knew they needed to smile. And that ordinary message broke through them more deeply than any dramatic farewell could have. Because they suddenly understood that your love had lived inside ordinary things. It had lived in consistency. In attention. In remembering details. In caring without needing an audience. In showing up when there was nothing to gain. They kept scrolling. With each message, a version of themselves appeared that they no longer recognized. They saw your patience beside their indifference. Your vulnerability beside their avoidance. Your honesty beside their half-truths. Your effort beside their excuses. And then they found one message that made their hand begin to tremble. It was a message you had sent during a time when you were hurting, yet still trying to protect the connection. In that message, you were not accusing them. You were asking them to meet you halfway. You told them you did not want to lose what you shared. You told them you believed the two of you could heal if both hearts were willing. You told them you were tired, but you had not given up. They remembered reading that message when it first arrived. They remembered delaying their reply. They remembered feeling certain that you would still be there later. But later became too late. In the quiet room, regret finally stopped whispering. It spoke. It said, "You were loved, and you behaved as though love was replaceable." Their chest tightened. They placed the phone down. They stood and walked toward the window, but your reflection seemed to follow them in the glass. Not your physical reflection. The reflection of every moment they failed to cherish. Every time they dismissed your intuition. Every time they made you question whether you were asking for too much. Every time they allowed silence to punish you. Every time they chose pride over honesty. Every time you needed reassurance and received distance instead. They began to understand that their greatest regret was not losing access to you. It was losing the version of themselves that existed when your love was near. You inspired softness in them. You inspired courage. You made them want to believe that love could be safe, even when their past had taught them otherwise. Yet because safety felt unfamiliar, they mistook it for danger. Because genuine intimacy frightened them, they created distance. Because your love reached places they had spent years hiding, they blamed you for the discomfort of being seen. This is one of the deepest truths unfolding in this fictional tale. Sometimes people do not reject love because it is wrong. They reject it because it reveals what they have not healed. Your soulmate was not prepared for the depth you carried. They wanted love, but they did not yet understand responsibility. They wanted connection, but they feared accountability. They wanted your warmth, but they resisted the honesty required to keep it. And you, dear heart, kept trying to love them into readiness. You believed patience might heal what only self-awareness could heal. You believed your devotion might quiet their fear. You believed that if you became gentler, calmer, more understanding, more forgiving, they would eventually feel safe enough to choose you fully. But love cannot do another person's inner work for them. You could hold the lantern. You could not make them open their eyes. When you finally released them, they were left alone with the darkness they had expected you to keep illuminating. That is when regret became their teacher. They began meeting people who offered attention without depth. People who liked the image they presented but never noticed the sorrow beneath it. People who enjoyed their company but did not understand their silence. People who were attracted to their charm but uninterested in their wounds. At first, they told themselves this was easier. No difficult conversations. No deep vulnerability. No one asking them to grow. But easy connection soon felt empty. They found themselves comparing every conversation to the way you listened. They compared every laugh to the one you gave when you forgot to guard your joy. They compared every touch to the comfort that existed when you held them without trying to control them. They compared every new beginning to the home they once found in your presence. And comparison became a quiet punishment. They did not want to compare. They tried not to. But the heart remembers what the mind attempts to replace. There were moments they nearly reached out. You may have felt them. Perhaps your name crossed their mind at the same hour they crossed yours. Perhaps you woke unexpectedly from a dream and felt an old emotion pass through you like wine through an open window. Perhaps a song appeared, or a memory surfaced, or you felt an unexplained heaviness that did not seem to belong entirely to you. Within this fictional narration, those moments symbolize the invisible threads between unresolved hearts. They typed your name. They opened the message box. They wrote, "I hope you are doing well." Then deleted it. They wrote, "I have been thinking about you." Deleted again. They wrote, "I am sorry." But the word looked too small. How could 3 words carry the weight of everything they finally understood? How could an apology explain the nights you cried? How could a message repair the trust they treated carelessly? How could they return after teaching you how painful it was to depend on their promises? They stared at the empty screen, and fear stopped them. Not fear that you would be angry. Fear that you had healed. Fear that you had finally become the person they always said you should be: strong, independent, confident, only now that strength no longer revolved around waiting for them. Your healing became the possibility they were least prepared to face. They had imagined you missing them. They had imagined you still checking their name. They had imagined some part of you remained exactly where they left it. But while they were distracting themselves, you were changing. Quietly. Painfully. Beautifully. You began gathering the pieces of yourself you had scattered while trying to keep the connection alive. You remembered dreams you postponed. You returned to parts of your personality that had gone silent. You laughed without immediately checking whether they would approve. You slept through nights that once kept you awake. You began noticing how peaceful life could feel when your heart was no longer waiting for inconsistency to turn into love. Your healing did not happen all at once. There were setbacks. There were mornings when you felt strong and evenings when a memory collapsed that strength. There were days when you missed them so deeply that the absence felt physical. There were moments you almost returned, not because the relationship had changed, but because loneliness made the familiar pain seem safer than the unknown future. Yet every time you nearly abandoned yourself, something within you rose. A quiet dignity. A sacred refusal. A new understanding that missing someone does not always mean you are meant to return to them. Sometimes it only means the love was real. Sometimes it means your heart is grieving what it hoped could exist. Sometimes it means you are human. And grief, when honored, becomes a doorway. You walked through that doorway. On the other side, you began to see the relationship differently. You stopped remembering only the best moments. You remembered the confusion. The waiting. The way you blamed yourself for their distance. The way you questioned your beauty, your value, your intelligence, your emotional depth. The way you became afraid to express your needs because you did not want to be called difficult. The way you accepted crumbs and called them progress. You began to understand that love should not require you to become less visible. That realization changed your energy. Even people around you noticed. There was a steadiness in your eyes that had not been there before. A softness that no longer came from weakness, but from self-respect. A quiet glow that appears when someone stops abandoning themselves. And within this fictional celestial perspective, your soulmate sensed that shift long before they understood it. They could no longer feel your attention reaching toward them. For so long, even during silence, some part of your heart remained turned in their direction. You wondered what they were doing. You imagined what they might say. You replayed conversations and revised endings. But gradually, your inner gaze turned forward. You stopped making them the center of your emotional world. And when your energy withdrew, they felt the emptiness. It was not mystical punishment. It was consequence. The warmth they once received without gratitude was gone. The emotional shelter they believed would always remain available had closed its door. That absence forced them to encounter themselves without your love softening the mirror. What they saw was difficult. They saw someone who had wanted unconditional love but offered conditional effort. Someone who feared abandonment yet behaved in ways that created it. Someone who begged life for a loyal heart, then wounded the loyal heart when it arrived. Someone who prayed for connection, then resisted the vulnerability connection required. This recognition did not come gently. It arrived through sleepless nights. Through failed attempts to replace you. Through celebrations that felt hollow because you were not there to witness them. Through problems they wanted to discuss with you, only to remember they had lost the privilege of your listening. Through moments of success that felt incomplete because the first person they wanted to tell was the person they had pushed away. One particular evening became a turning point. They received news they had once dreamed of receiving. It may have been a career opportunity, a personal achievement, or the resolution of a long struggle. People congratulated them. Messages arrived. Their phone filled with praise. They smiled. They thanked everyone. They pretended to be fully present. But when the room became quiet, they reached for their phone and searched for your name. For a moment, instinct forgot reality. They imagined your reaction. They could almost hear your voice becoming excited. They could picture the way you would make their success feel larger because you understood what it had cost them. Then the truth returned. You were not there. And they knew why. They sat down slowly. The achievement remained real, but joy slipped through their hands. That was when they realized the magnitude of what they had lost. You were not merely someone who loved them when life was easy. You were someone who understood the journey behind every victory. You knew the private fears. The hidden sacrifices. The nights they almost gave up. You had believed in outcomes they could not yet see. Now the outcome had arrived, but the person who carried faith for them was absent. This was their biggest regret. Not only that they lost you, but that they lost you before becoming the person you always believed they could be. They wished you could see them now. They wished they could return to the beginning with the awareness they had gained at the end. They wished they could answer your old messages differently. They wished they could choose honesty in the moments they chose silence. They wished they could hold you during the nights they left you alone. They wished they could go back to the day you looked at them with tears in your eyes and asked, "Do you still want this?" They remembered their hesitation. They remembered how your expression changed. A tiny light went out inside you. They saw it happen, but instead of reaching for you, they protected their pride. Now they would give anything to return to that moment. They would answer before fear intervened. They would say, "Yes. I want this. I am afraid, but I do not want to lose you. Help me learn how to stay." But life does not always return us to the moment we finally understand. Sometimes understanding is the price of losing it. Do not mistake their regret as proof that you must reopen every door. Regret can be sincere, yet sincerity alone does not create readiness. Someone may miss you deeply and still lack the courage to change. Someone may understand your value and still be unprepared to honor it. Someone may cry over losing you while continuing the patterns that caused the loss. Your heart must learn the difference between emotion and transformation. Emotion says, "I cannot live without you." Transformation says, "I have faced the parts of myself that made loving me painful." Emotion sends a late-night message. Transformation develops consistency in daylight. Emotion remembers your beauty. Transformation becomes capable of protecting it. Within this story, your soulmate is standing at the edge of that distinction. Their regret has awakened them, but awakening is only the beginning. They are being confronted by a choice. Will they merely grieve you? Or will they become worthy of the love they lost? That question is creating a storm inside them. They have begun examining their past more honestly. They are recognizing patterns that existed long before you. They remember watching love become unstable in their early life. Perhaps affection was inconsistent. Perhaps apologies were rare. Perhaps silence was used as punishment. Perhaps they learned that needing someone meant giving that person the power to hurt them. So when your love arrived, part of them desired it, while another part prepared to defend against it. They tested you. They withdrew to see whether you would chase. They created distance to measure your loyalty. They withheld reassurance because vulnerability felt like surrender. Each time you stayed, they felt safe for a moment. Then fear returned, demanding another test. They did not understand that every test was exhausting the very love they hoped to secure. You kept passing, but they kept changing the rules. Until one day, you stopped taking the test. That ending shattered the story they had built around themselves. They had believed people always left because others were unfaithful, impatient, or incapable of understanding them. But your departure was different. You had been patient. You had been loyal. You had tried to understand. You left not because you lacked love, but because love without mutual care was destroying you. That truth removed their excuses. They could no longer blame timing. They could not blame misunderstanding. They could not pretend you had not tried. Your absence became evidence. It showed them that even devoted hearts have limits. That forgiveness is not permission. That loyalty is not captivity. That a loving person can walk away while still carrying love. This realization humbled them. For the first time, they began asking questions they had avoided. Why did I make them feel alone while standing beside them? Why did I wait until they became distant to offer affection? Why did their tears make me defensive instead of compassionate? Why did I see their needs as pressure? Why did I believe vulnerability would weaken me? Why did I treat their love like something I could postpone appreciating? The answers frightened them. Not because you were the problem. Because you were not. They began to see that they had repeated old wounds without realizing it. They had become the source of the very abandonment they feared experiencing. And in this fictional heavenly story, that awareness becomes the first crack through which light enters. They started changing small things. No one applauded. No one noticed. They began speaking more honestly with people in their life. They apologized without immediately defending themselves. They stopped disappearing when conversations became uncomfortable. They listened to understand rather than listening for an opportunity to escape responsibility. They began facing emotions they once buried beneath distraction. But every act of growth carried your memory. They imagined how different things might have been if they had learned these lessons while you were still near. They wondered whether you would recognize them now. Then a more painful question followed. Would you believe them? Trust is not restored through beautiful sentences. They know that. They know you have heard promises before. They know that words once became bridges that collapsed beneath your feet. So even as they consider reaching out, they understand that apology alone cannot ask you to risk your peace. This is where their regret becomes deepest. They do not simply miss your presence. They regret damaging your ability to feel safe with them. They regret that even if their heart now speaks truth, your heart may hear an echo of every past disappointment. They regret that they made you doubt whether their love was real. They regret that you may carry scars into places they will never see. They regret that someone else may one day receive the healed, radiant version of you that they helped awaken through pain. That thought pierces them. They imagine you laughing with someone who does not make you question where you stand. They imagine you being loved openly. They imagine someone replying to your messages with care. Someone noticing when your voice changes. Someone protecting your softness. Someone choosing you without delay. They imagine another person holding the hand they once released. And suddenly, jealousy is not the strongest emotion. Grief is. Because they know you deserve that kind of love all along. They know they had the opportunity to give it. They know you were willing to build slowly, patiently, imperfectly. You did not demand a flawless person. You asked for an honest one. You did not need grand gestures every day. You needed reliability. You did not expect them to read your mind. You asked them to care when you spoke. You were not impossible to love. You were simply impossible to love casually without eventually losing. That truth has become impossible for them to escape. Perhaps you are listening to this and feeling tears gather. Perhaps part of you feels comforted by the idea that they regret losing you. Another part may feel angry. You may think, why did they have to lose me before they saw me? That question deserves tenderness. Sometimes people recognize value only when absence removes their access to it. Not because the value was hidden, but because entitlement covered their eyes. They grew accustomed to your light. They assumed sunrise belonged to them. Only after darkness came did they understand that light was a gift. But their delayed understanding does not erase your pain. It does not return the nights you spent feeling unworthy. It does not give back the energy you poured into saving something they would not help you carry. It does not undo the way you learned to doubt your intuition. You are allowed to acknowledge their regret without using it to invalidate your wounds. You are allowed to feel compassion and still maintain boundaries. You are allowed to love what was real and refuse what was harmful. You are allowed to accept an apology without restoring access. And you are allowed to remain open to reconciliation only if transformation not loneliness stands before you. Your story is not asking you to become cold. It is asking you to become discerning. There is a difference. A cold heart closes because it fears love. A discerning heart remains warm but watches whether actions can hold what words promise. You have become discerning through fire. And that growth is part of why your soulmate feels you slipping beyond the version of you they once knew. You are no longer waiting for them to validate your worth. You are beginning to see yourself through clearer eyes. You remember now that your love was never the weakness. Your willingness to stay was not foolish. Your hope was not embarrassing. You loved sincerely. That is nothing to regret. The lesson was not that you should love less deeply. The lesson was that deep love must be given where it can breathe. You are not being asked to become suspicious of every future heart. You are being prepared to recognize reciprocity. You will know it by how peaceful it feels. You will know it by the absence of confusion. You will know it because you will no longer have to decode silence, chase reassurance, or shrink your needs to avoid abandonment. Real love may still challenge you. It may still require difficult conversations. But it will not make you question whether you matter. In the unseen landscape of this fictional story, your soulmate senses that you are moving toward such love. Whether it comes from them after genuine transformation or through another chapter not yet revealed, your heart is approaching a threshold. Something is changing. You may already feel it. The past no longer has the same grip. Memories still visit, but they do not always control the entire day. You can hear their name without losing your breath. You can remember the good without using it to excuse the painful. You are becoming free, and freedom carries a frequency regret can feel from a distance. Your soulmate has begun dreaming of you. Not always romantic dreams. Sometimes you are simply walking away down a long road while they call your name. In one dream, they see you standing beneath a golden sky, but every step they take toward you causes you to move farther into the light. In another, they are inside a familiar house, opening door after door, searching for you. Each room contains a memory, but you are nowhere inside it. They wake with their heart racing. For several seconds, they forget you are gone. Then reality enters. The dreams are not prophecies. They are symbols created by a mind confronting loss. They reveal a fear growing inside them, that while they are finally learning how to love, you may be learning how to live without them. That fear has moved them closer to action. They have started writing something. Not a casual message. Not a desperate plea. Something longer. Something honest. They begin, stop, and begin again. They try to explain what they now understand. They admit that your love frightened them because it was real. They admit that they used distance as protection. They admit that they assumed you would remain because you had forgiven so much. They admit that losing you forced them to face themselves. But every time they reach the most important part, their courage fades. Because there is one truth they have not yet written. A truth even they are struggling to accept. Their biggest regret is not only that they lost you. Their biggest regret is that on the day they allowed you to walk away, they already knew they loved you. They knew. Perhaps they did not know how to express it. Perhaps fear covered it. Perhaps pride silenced it. But somewhere beneath all their confusion, they knew your heart mattered more than they admitted. When you asked for clarity, they already had an answer. When you asked whether they cared, their heart had spoken long before their mouth did. When you stood at the edge of leaving, they felt the terror of losing you. Yet they remained silent. That silence is the moment they replay most. They remember your face. They remember the pause. They remember waiting for themselves to say something. Anything. Please stay. I am afraid. I love you. Do not give up on me yet. But none of it came. You turned away. And their pride told them there would be another chance. There was always another chance before. But that time, the door closed differently. They felt it. A finality entered the silence. Even if you spoke again afterward, something sacred had shifted. You were no longer offering your heart with the same innocence. You had begun protecting what they had failed to protect. Now they understand that love can survive many mistakes, but it cannot remain unchanged after repeated neglect. They wish they could meet the version of you who loved them before fear entered your eyes. They wish they could apologize to the version of you who believed every promise. They wish they could hold the version of you who cried alone after pretending to be strong. They wish they could tell that version, you were never difficult. You were asking the wrong person to become ready before they had chosen to heal. But time moves in one direction. And regret lives in the distance between who we were and who we finally become. Still, the story is not over. There is a reason this revelation is arriving now within this fictional narration. Not to pull you backward. Not to make you wait. Not to convince you that every feeling means reunion. It is arriving because you deserve to understand that their inability to value you did not mean you lacked value. Their silence did not mean your love was forgettable. Their distance did not mean you were unworthy of closeness. Their delayed regret is evidence of what your intuition already knew. You brought something rare. You brought sincerity into a world of performance. You brought devotion into a heart trained to expect abandonment. You brought emotional depth to someone who had survived by staying on the surface. They may not have known how to receive it, but they felt it. And now, in your absence, they feel the shape of what is missing. There are certain people whose presence becomes more visible after they leave. You are one of those people. Because you did not merely occupy space. You changed the emotional temperature of the room. You made people feel remembered. You noticed what others overlooked. You carried tenderness into ordinary moments. You made home out of attention. Your soulmate did not realize how much of their peace was connected to your presence until the peace disappeared. Now they search for that feeling in places where it does not exist. They revisit locations you once shared. They choose routes that pass familiar landmarks. They pause when someone wears a color you loved. They hear your laughter in crowded rooms, only to turn and find a stranger. Regret has made the world full of echoes. Yet something else is happening. As they grieve, they are beginning to understand that loving you now may require allowing you to choose freely. This is new for them. Before, love was entangled with control, fear, and possession. Now they are learning that real love does not demand access simply because regret has appeared. They know they may reach out and receive silence. They know you may respond with kindness but no invitation. They know you may have moved into a life where their return no longer fits. And still, a part of them feels they must tell the truth. Not to manipulate you. Not to interrupt your healing. But because silence has already cost them too much. The message they are writing has changed over several nights. At first, it was filled with explanations. Then they deleted the explanations. They realized explanations can sound like excuses when the wound is still visible. Next, they wrote promises. They deleted those too. They remembered how many promises had already lost their meaning. Finally, they began writing something simpler. They wrote about responsibility. They acknowledged specific moments. They named the ways they hurt you without asking you to minimize them. They admitted that they had loved you badly. Not because you were unlovable, but because they were unhealed. They wrote, "You were not asking for too much. I was offering too little and expecting you to call it enough." Then they stopped. That sentence made them cry. Not dramatically. Quietly. The kind of crying that comes when truth reaches a place denial has guarded for years. They covered their face. And in that moment, they finally grieved not only losing you, but becoming someone who could lose a love like yours. They are carrying shame. But shame alone cannot heal them. They must move toward accountability. They must learn to forgive themselves without escaping responsibility. They must become someone who does not need pain to recognize value. This process is happening slowly. You may never witness all of it. And perhaps that is part of the mystery. Not every transformation caused by your love is meant to return to you as a relationship. Sometimes your presence becomes a turning point in another soul's journey, while your own path continues elsewhere. That does not make the love meaningless. It means the purpose was larger than possession. But there is still something unresolved between you. A truth has not yet reached the surface. Your soulmate recently discovered something about the final days of your connection. Something they misunderstood. A detail they believed meant you had stopped caring. A moment they interpreted as rejection. For a long time, they used that memory to protect themselves from guilt. They told themselves, they had already moved on. They told themselves, "They did not love me as deeply as I thought." They told themselves your calmness meant indifference. But now they have learned that your calmness was not indifference. It was exhaustion. They discovered that while you appeared composed, you were fighting one of the hardest emotional battles of your life. They learned, through a conversation, an old message, or a truth revealed by someone who saw your pain, that you had not left because you stopped loving them. You left while still loving them. You left because staying was teaching you to abandon yourself. That discovery has changed everything. It removed the final excuse they had used to protect their pride. They can no longer tell themselves that you never cared. They now know you cared so deeply that leaving nearly broke you. They know you did not walk away easily. You walked away because every other path had closed. This realization has brought them to a decision. A decision they have not told anyone. They have set a date. They have chosen a moment. They intend to send the message they have been writing. But something happened before they could finish it. Something unexpected. While rereading your old conversation, they found a message from you they had never truly understood. It was sent near the end. At the time, they skimmed it because emotion made them defensive. Now, reading it slowly, they noticed one sentence buried near the bottom. A sentence that revealed you had left a door open not forever, not without conditions, but long enough for truth to enter. They stared at those words. Their breathing changed. Because they realized you had not asked them to become perfect. You had asked them to become honest before it was too late. And now, for the first time, they believe they may finally have the courage to tell you everything. But there is one confession still missing from their message. One confession that explains why they pushed you away when they loved you most. One hidden event from their past shaped every choice they made with you. They never told you about it. They never told anyone. And until they reveal that secret, neither of you can fully understand why your love became both the safest place they had ever known and the place they were most terrified to remain. Tonight, within this fictional story, they are sitting beneath the glow of a single lamp, your old message open before them, their unfinished confession trembling beneath their fingertips. They have finally written the first words. Not, "I miss you." Not, "Please come back." Not even, "I am sorry." They have written something far more dangerous to their pride. They have written, "There is a truth about the night I lost you that I have been too afraid to tell." And what comes after that sentence will reveal why they disappeared, what they were hiding, and why losing you became the greatest regret of their life.